it going? So I am a teacher, an English and ESL teacher, and today I'm going to talk about language education or second language acquisition and technology. Quick show of hands, who here has ever studied a second language? Okay, keep your hand up if you are fluent in more than one language. Okay, so not very many people here are fluent in more than one language. There are a few reasons for that. One of the reasons is that learning a second language is really, really hard, and usually you can't do it unless you're immersed in a culture, spend some period of time living there and operating within that language. So I'm not going to be able to talk to you about how technology is going to replace that aspect of language learning, but I am going to talk a little bit about how technology can make language learning more difficult or easier. So, wouldn't it be great if we could just download knowledge into our minds? You know, like our friend Neo here, we could just lie back and all of a sudden a new language would be implanted into our minds and we'd be able to operate in another language. Well, unfortunately, we can't do that because knowledge doesn't work like that. We have to be active participants in constructing knowledge. We need to be engaged in how we learn things, and we need to be in charge of negotiating meanings. So a lot of what we do in language teaching and second language acquisition is teaching students to negotiate new meaning. So they look at what they already know about the world in their language and they encounter new languages and negotiate meaning between one to the other, because unfortunately you can't just transplant what you know in one language into another one. Okay, so recently, over the last few years, there's been a lot of talk about how the internet and how access to all the world's information is impacting the way we learn and impacting our memory. My friend Ryan here recently wrote an article about the Google effect, looking at Nicholas Carr's Google making us stupid, and a more recent study in 2011 about this idea of the Google effect. So basically, are we outsourcing our memory, and what does this have to do with language learning? So Sparrow and Lou and Wegner here said that when we believe, I'm summarizing, when we believe that we will be able to access information later, we are less likely to remember the information and more likely to remember where to access it. So basically that means that when I wanted to know where an article about the Google effect was, I didn't remember what journal it was written in or what website it was on. I knew that it was on my friend Ryan's Facebook page and I looked it up there. So, but I didn't remember what it said until I went back and accessed it. Basically, their argument is, and I've found that this correlates with what's going on in schools with second language learners, is that rather than learning vast tracts of vocabulary, when given the option to just memorize where something is located, they can just pop on their smartphones, their portable electronic dictionaries, and access the vocabulary. This has huge implications for language learning. Most of them are negative. But there are some positive things that are coming out of the research. Recently, a German educator did some research in how we can encourage people to learn vocabulary more effectively and actually operate within a second language. They found that by making it clear to them that they would have to know this later and they wouldn't have the access to the technology, that they would learn it more effectively. Okay. One of the problems or issues that is facing the incorporation of technology in schools is this divide between digital natives. Most of us in this room would probably be classified as digital natives to some extent, and digital immigrants. All of my students are digital natives. They've grown up with the internet, with computer games. They know how to access information, vast tracts of information, and they think differently to how people were thinking 25 years ago, 30 years ago, and how people who have not grown up with the internet at their fingertips are currently still thinking. So one of the problems with technology in schools is that you have digital immigrants teaching digital natives, and there's a clash there, and so teachers aren't incorporating technology effectively, which leads to student disengagement and using technology for its own sake rather than as an effective learning tool. Okay, so what does this mean for language learners? So students are relying on portable electronic dictionaries or computer programs with hyperlinked glosses, so we can click on a word and the translation will come up, or a monolingual dictionary will come up. This interferes with language learning because it disrupts the process, and it can lead to them being more actively engaged in making meaning or less actively engaged, depending on the learner and depending on the way the teacher uses the technology. One of the big problems is Google Translate. Do we have any Mandarin speakers? Okay, I'm going to be calling on you in a second. So Google Translate, I put this sentence in Google Translate earlier today. Technology in schools is a good thing because it engages digital natives and equips them to be 21st century workforce. Okay, then I asked it to translate it into Chinese. Okay, I can't read Chinese. Can you read that? No? Okay. When I translated it back into English, it kind of got things switched around and it distorted the meaning. What happens for my students is that they rely heavily on Google Translate, and I did it when I was studying German last year, and that's okay for very simple tracts of text, but when it gets to more complex sentences with multiple clauses, meaning gets muddled up and students don't actually learn the proper syntax and things like that, so it that poorly affects their language take-up. Okay, but we can't escape the fact that technology is becoming an integral part of the way we learn and the way we teach. Okay, and this is what we want it to look like. We want students to be on task, we want collaboration between learners, and we want the students to be safe. And that's a really big deal, and that's what's really preventing a lot of effective uptake of technology in classrooms, is this idea of safety and child protection. Okay, however, this is unfortunately what technology looks like most of the time. When I was teaching more recently beginners in ESL, they always had their smartphones, and despite it being DET policy to not have phones in class at any time, the kids were constantly using them as dictionaries, which meant that they were off task most of the time, playing games on Facebook, or QQ, which is the Chinese version of Facebook, and various things like that. And I felt like poor Miss Krabappel there. Okay, why does this happen? Well, as I said, some older teachers and new ones are uncomfortable with technology. So going back to that digital natives and digital immigrants thing, they don't know how to incorporate it effectively into their classes. We also have commercialization of research and products. So there was a Smartpen that came out a while ago, which is, the name of it is coming up here, outsourcing my memory, where basically all the literature, all the academic literature about this Smartpen was sort of involved with how great it was going to be and how it was going to revolutionize ESL teaching in China, and how if only everybody had this Smartpen, everyone would be able to learn English more effectively, because the way they teach English in China is really ineffective. And I had students who would learn English for 9-10 years before they'd come to Australia and still couldn't string a sentence together at all, and yet they would groan and mumble whenever you taught them a new concept, because their receptive language was quite high, but what they could produce was very low. That was because of the way English is taught over there. And so the idea of the Smartpen is great because it actually encourages the kids to produce more language. However, it's also not encouraging collaboration and active engagement, which are those 2 points I sort of came up with before. Okay, so the research and the practice often aren't linking up. Research isn't focusing on adolescent learners, it focuses on adult learners who are actively engaged and have other incentives to participate in the classroom. They also have better metacognitive strategies, more hooks to peg new knowledge on, and a better understanding of their own language. So when you compare adult learners with children, and you see, well, these strategies work for one lot of students but not another, there's a clear disconnect. And part of that is because of the ethics processes involved in researching in schools. Okay, so basically, we're fucked. Okay, a lot of teachers in the government see technology as a panacea. They think, we'll just throw some technology at it. There are schools at the moment that are spending millions of dollars updating these entire rooms where you can touch every surface and write on everything, and there are big computers as big as that coffee table that everyone can play with, and that's not necessarily going to make learning better. It's not going to make the students more engaged just by the fact that the technology is there. You need the good pedagogy too. So there are, the Livescribe Smart pen that I mentioned before, there's dodgy research in that. It's a great tool, but it needs to be used effectively by teachers and students in a way that actively promotes engagement. And there's a quote there from the article. Okay, so a lot of teachers are using technology for the sake of it. And also, technology takes a lot of time to set up. If you want to create a new website or a blog, that's a lot of hours that need to be involved in first uptake. It does pay off eventually, because once you've set that up, you often only have to maintain it, and you don't have to spend as much time later on with other classes. Okay. All right, but technology can be a great helper too. And most of the research is pointing to social networking and Web 2.0 and apps as useful aids to learning in the classroom. So those are a couple of different ones. But the most interesting one for me, are we going back? Okay, so not this Rebecca Black, a different Rebecca Black in 2005 did some research with, she's doing ethnographic research about fan fiction communities and English language learners from China and Japan primarily. And what she found was that the way social networking websites, particularly fan fiction forums, safe communities that are bound by interest groups and an intrinsic reward, are one of the best ways to promote second language learning, because it provides a community space where people feel that they are actively supported by the people around them, and they can receive really, really interesting feedback both on form and function of their work. Okay. So what she found was that with authentic communication, engagement, and multiple literacies in the electronic world, so this involves multimodal video as well as web etiquette and things like that, use of meta language, so talking about language constructs, talking about grammar and community, were all assisted by technology. And these are things that teachers are now trying to harness in the classroom through blogs, through programs like Ming, which is a social networking site, through VoiceThread, and this is the way that we are going to be able to promote language learning in classes and other kinds of learning as well. They're much more effective than gadgets and sort of single-use apps. It's all about social networking and community. Okay, my nice little thing there. So, teachers need a better understanding of the impact of technologies on cognition and second language acquisition. So we need to look at the Google effect, how it's affecting learning, and how that in turn impacts language acquisition. How adolescents learn languages using technology on their own time as well as in the classroom. How to use authentic cultural texts and voices, and how to judge the usefulness of particular technology. I see a lot of teachers just adopting something quickly because it's there, and it doesn't necessarily aid anything or help the students. It's just fun. I've done it myself. I know most teachers I know have done it because it's quick and it's easy and it's fun. A lot of the time it's actually a time waster and sometimes can lead to detrimental learning habits. So, any questions?